Jordana, how are you?
Hi Maya, I'm excellent. How are you?
I'm excellent as well.
So
Very
nice to
happy.
see you.
Nice to see you too. It's always nice to chat with you. I love chatting with you, Jordana, because you're just one of these really fun persons in the profession. Few that are really that much fun to talk to. I like your energy and just your strength and how you deal with things and situations. And that's why I actually wanted to interview you today because I know that you have not just me. I think a lot of people know. I mean, by the way, Jordana Goldlist is pretty much known, one of the really well-known people in the criminal law profession in Ontario and in the country, because of, like you have a very interesting story that I hope you'll get to tell us a bit about it before you became a lawyer, but also how, as a lawyer, you still continue to be this very strong, like woman who takes on these tough cases and who faces all these challenges. So I want you to tell us all about it. So let's start with the phase before you became a lawyer, because you had a lot of struggles and challenges that you had to overcome. So let's get
Yeah,
into that.
sure. I mean, I started sort of struggling with life from a really young age. I've been very outspoken about it. Had a lot of sort of trials and tribulations leading into my teenage years. I started acting out and engaging in very self-destructive behaviors. So I wasn't like a fighter. I wasn't a person who was trying to hurt other people, but often engaged in conduct that was hurtful to myself. And it grew more and more problematic in my early teens. And so the day after I turned 14, I was sent into the group home system. I was there sort of bouncing around Youthdale and other similar facilities for about 21 months. Came out and had focused all of my harmful behaviors, just whittled them down to one, and that was substance abuse, and became a very serious drug addict very quickly. Drugs took hold of me in a unprecedented way. It was very quickly that I lost control of everything. Dropped out of school, left home, got arrested, like the typical stories that we
Yeah.
would read from a youth pre-sentence report, quite frankly.
Right. It's very
So
similar to what many of our clients
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. And it's that snowball effect. And I lived firsthand what we often see as that snowball effect,
Yeah.
which is why now I try to spend a lot of time, outside of my practice, but within the confines of these speaking engagements, talking about how important it is in crime prevention, and I use that term
Yeah.
loosely,
Mm-hmm.
to actually interrupt the cycle before
Yeah.
it really starts,
Mm-hmm.
because I know how quickly it can take hold and how quickly it can cause a person to really lose themselves, really. And so was on a very self-destructive path throughout my teenage years that I managed to pull myself out of at 19. So it took quite a long time. Basically destroyed my entire teenage years, but managed to pull myself out of it. Went to rehab for 6 months, cleaned up, moved back home eventually once my mother could trust that I really was going to quit this time, because I, like all drug addicts, had not been so honest about my intentions
Mm-hmm.
previously.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a bit of a roller coaster. Came back home, finished high school at 21, so it was, a bit of a challenge, but made it through, and then straight into university. And even then, we talk about um, addiction as being something that just takes hold of a person, and it really does. I don't think that there's a straight line to sobriety.
Yeah.
And so for me, I struggled even in my undergrad years. I relapsed, managed to still get myself into Osgoode Hall Law School at 25 years old. And that's really when I changed courses completely. Like, I sort of entered law school with my feet in both worlds, right? Here I was, like, on the path to being a lawyer, but I still had one foot in the door of drug subculture,
Yeah.
and realized very quickly into my first semester that I was not going to be able to straddle both worlds the way that I had in undergrad, and decided to put all of my effort into law school, because I felt like it was my one shot, right? It was the one opportunity that I thought I was going to have to do something different, and I needed to give it like 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So did that, and never looked back. It's been 21 years now.
Nice. But I actually, just to go back on the point that you just mentioned, that there were a few moments of relapse. I find like that's the most difficult part when you're trying to overcome a drug addiction. Um, Even when you're doing well, there's always going to be, especially at the beginning of phase, where you kind of go back, you revert back to that. But now it seems like you've been solidly out of this and you're doing well. But can you just talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that this is a challenge, whether it's drugs or alcohol or any kind of other addiction or problem that a person has, that sometimes they're trying, they really want to get out of it, but they can't 100% be out right away. So if we can just dig a bit more here in
Sure.
this
So,
area.
yeah, so for me, I mean, I came out of rehab at 19 and was
Hmm.
dedicated to living completely sober. Did for about 6 months. And then as a 19-year-old, like it was hard. Everything around me was like party driven,
Yeah.
alcohol based, people were drinking. I went to the 12-step meetings and I felt like I didn't quite fit in any sort of category, right? Like the
Hmm.
old timers seemed to be like, they had no idea what life was like for, this little raver slash street kid. And then, even the kids, like people that were my age didn't seem to have fallen to quite the level that I had in terms of like substance use because I was, bottom level junkie. And most of the, young teenagers that I was in the 12 step programs with had not dropped to such a
Hmm.
significant level at such a young age. So I felt like they didn't understand me. I really couldn't find my place anywhere. And that was probably my biggest challenge when I first got clean was finding like a social circle that made sense to me in sobriety and I just couldn't. So I started, hanging out with other kids that were in the alternative high school that I went to. A lot of them were smoking weed. I started smoking weed again. I started drinking a little bit, but like controlled. And
Yeah,
so, the addict mind is very similar, and we see it often in people who struggle with significant mental health illness. So a lot of schizophrenics, for example, once they get medicated, they feel like, oh, I'm healed, I'm cured, I don't need the medication anymore.
exactly. Yeah.
Stop taking the
Yeah.
medication, and then the symptoms come back.
Yeah.
And I think for me, and I think a lot of people struggle in addiction. I think I'm special in this, but I experienced this belief when I could drink once without going back to smoking crack. Oh, I must have cured my crack addiction, and now I can just drink. And that almost gave me permission to drink more and again and again and again. And eventually that led me to using drugs again, and those drugs led me back to cocaine again. And it took
Yeah.
it took years. Like it wasn't, overnight, but because I was able to, drink and then party, I was going back to clubs, but still maintaining straight A's, still in university, working two part-time jobs, living at home. Like addiction looked different for me in my 20s than it did in my teens. So my teens, I had nothing, like high school dropout, nothing, living like
Yeah.
day to day, hit to hit. In my 20s, I had built, a better foundation under me. I had, I was in university, I was on an entrance scholarship my first year. I had jobs. I felt like I was good. I was started going to the gym, so I felt like, oh, I'm healthy. So,
Yeah.
oh, it's okay if once in a while I'm out at a
Yeah.
nightclub and I'm popping E's
Yeah.
and sipping G, and that was like the life. And so I sort of convinced myself that it would be okay to continue on in that lifestyle as long as I still maintained in school and at
Hmm.
work. That was sort of the way that I negotiated my own
Yeah.
substance abuse. Um, and so I did, and but my use got worse, and I started, allowing myself to do other drugs, and yeah, I think it took, I want to say 2 years, maybe 2.5 years for me to have a cocaine relapse. And that just totally sucked me under. Like that to me was
Yeah.
detrimental. And the catalyst for me to decide that I needed to go clean, and that meant for me completely drug free. Like I can't indulge at all. And that's just for my own protection. Like I don't trust myself, I guess.
Yeah. No, and it's pretty amazing, like to be able to overcome all of that because that's really very difficult. I mean, we see it through our clients a lot, or even people that we know. It's not easy. And sometimes people try really hard, and it takes a lot of will, a lot of determination to get to a point where you make a decision that I don't want to go back. to that. So that's where all the strength comes in. But I wanted to ask you, Jordana, how was the profession? Like, how were the people around you in law school when, like, were you open about that at the
Oh,
beginning?
oh my
Yeah,
gosh. I
that's the
wasn't.
thing. It's a very judgmental
No, no, no. I
environment.
was so scared of anyone knowing my
Yeah,
history.
yeah.
I was like completely leading for the first month. I was like leading a double life. I was like,
Okay.
I was still partying a little bit on the weekends. I quit doing cocaine the June before we started law school. I spent the summer like going through the withdrawals, going through the detox, like doing all the things, but still using like sort of softer, party drugs. And so my first couple of weeks of law school, like I was still, casually using. And I
Yeah.
remember like I think it was like the second weekend we had after school started, there was this like massive boat party. And so I was out partying for like 2 days. And I came into class on the Monday and I was like, not
Yeah.
okay. I was exhausted. I was feeling the effects. And I sat down, I looked around, I was like, how's everybody's weekend? I thought
Yeah.
I thought everybody lived life sort of similar
Yeah.
to how I did, and they were all talking about how difficult the reading material was.
Yeah.
I was like, "What reading material?" Nobody told us,
Yeah.
and like, "Oh, it's online." And I was like, "Online where?" And I hadn't even paid enough attention to the materials to see that there was assignments and materials and things we had to read. And I sat there looking around, and I was like, nobody had the weekend that I had. Like
Yeah.
nobody was partying. Like everybody teacher was asking questions, people were answering, people were asking intelligent questions, like people were engaged in the
Yeah.
material. And I was out to lunch. I was like
Yeah.
not at all focused. And that's when I realized like I can't do this. This is not undergrad. This is not my philosophy degree. This is not a joke. And if I actually want to become a lawyer, like I gotta focus. And that was it. I stopped going out to parties. I stopped basically everything. I say it. I that first semester of law school, like I quit everything except law school. I quit drinking. I quit doing drugs. Like at the time, I was like a gym rat, so I was using all sorts of substances for like gym enhancement. I stopped that. I even stopped smoking, like cigarettes. Like I literally was like, okay,
Well,
this is
maybe
it.
that's the cure, right? Like law school, like is the cure to
Maybe.
everything because that's what it requires. You have to give up almost
Totally.
everything in your life to become a lawyer.
Totally. And I think, I mean, we joke about law school being the goal. That's what it was for me. But I think everybody needs a goal. Everybody needs, like,
Yeah.
if you really want to beat addiction, the goal has to be something beyond beating addiction, right? Because then you're just focused on addiction, whether
Right.
it's like curing it or not, right? Our minds will do what we lead it to do. And if all we're thinking about is I'm not going to use drugs, you're still only thinking about drugs, even if it means the act of not using it.
But I want to ask you though, Jordana, why did you decide to become a lawyer?
Oh, I wanted to be a lawyer when I was a little kid. My stepdad got arrested. I watched him being defended by Clayton Ruby. Clayton Ruby became like a god in my household. He was
Hmm.
like amazing, incredible, saved our family. And I didn't even understand what he did. I didn't understand the role of a lawyer. I didn't understand what a lawyer meant in society. I just knew that I wanted to be that important that the whole world stops when I make a phone call, and
Yeah.
I wanted to do it in a way that was helping people.
Hmm.
Like that, there was this altruistic side to it. So sure, ego is speaking when you say like everybody stops when you call, but it's not from a point of view of just like what that does for other people, but to be that integral in helping another family, because we thought of him in such high regard for so long for helping to exonerate my stepdad the way that he did. And I wanted to have that effect on other people. I wanted to be that meaningful and be that helpful, helping another family to navigate the system. And then, of course, as I started entering my teens, I became more and more argumentative, which also bodes well
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
career in law. And I never just accepted authority. There was always a part of me that questioned the why. Like you
Yeah.
tell me to do something and I want to understand why. And because someone says so, because that's the law, because that's the rule, it just never sat well with me. And I was always, that kid that was challenging. So I think those sort of different aspects all came together. obviously as a teenager, I didn't think I was gonna be a lawyer. I was arrested. I was, spent 4 days in Vanier. Like
Yeah.
I wasn't sitting in Vanier being like, oh shit, when I become a lawyer,
Yeah.
that was not on the table. And then I went to university and I studied philosophy and I loved it. I loved reading, I loved arguing, I loved hearing other people's views and coming up with, you know, a challenge to their approach. Um, and so there was just something about the act of arguing for me that really sat well and really connected with me, and not in a confrontational way, but from a place of growth. And and so I applied to law school just because I had always wanted to be a lawyer as a kid. And I certainly wasn't opposed to the idea of making a lot of money, which I wasn't going to do if I stayed in philosophy.
Hmm.
But I didn't think I was going to get in. There was no part of me that actually believes that anyone was going to accept me into the profession. I had no one that around me that was a lawyer that I could tap to like write a reference letter for me. I didn't come from a family that could pull strings anywhere. Sure, I got good grades, but I didn't think that that was enough. So I applied to law school just to say in my own mind that I had tried in case I look back and regretted not trying.
And so when you did go into law school and you got into the legal world, did you feel like you found your place, or did you still feel like you didn't belong?
I still don't feel like I
Yeah.
belong. I just don't care anymore.
Yeah, okay.
I never, but that's true of any place I've been throughout my life, right? Like that's not just about in the legal profession. I think that, if I look back at most of the spaces I've sort of occupied, even as a kid, like there was always a point in which I didn't quite feel like I fit in. And so I've never really looked for that, right? I've never really looked for like a sense of like, oh, I belong here, I should be here. I just sort of do what feels right. I do what interests me. I do what I enjoy. I do what makes me happy, and I do what makes me money. And that's sort of how I live life. And whether I fit in or not, I don't really care.
But you now got to a point, though, Jordana, where you're more open about your past. You
Yeah.
you talk about it, and I know you mentioned at the beginning that you didn't really want to talk about that. You were kind of, like not very open, or like not bringing this up, but now it's a completely different headspace where you're at. How did you get to that point though? Like what happened? What changed? Is it you, or is it just uh, like what is it that made you now become more open and not ashamed of talking about what happened to you?
So I promised myself in law school while I was like hiding everything. And so when I was in Osgood, when I got to I think second semester, I started experiencing like very, very significant PTSD symptoms, like really, really bad. I wasn't sleeping. I was like scared of my own shadow. I was suffering from really bad anxiety. Like I was really unwell. And I actually sought help from the counseling program at York University because it's
Hmm.
included, like as part of your tuition, you get access to counselors. And I remember when I called and I made my first appointment, I did so using a different name, like a made up name, because I thought they might call Osgood and tell them. And I was so worried that someone was actually going to find out that I was even accessing counseling. Like that's
Yeah. Oh
the
my
extent to
God.
which
Yeah.
I was trying to hide my
Yeah.
history. And I came in, and I think my first session was like, I just wanted to know about their confidentiality policies. Like I was petrified. And then, I started hearing the way that my colleagues and the other students at Osgood were talking about their potential clients. And there was this like huge, divide. It was like us versus them. And I didn't feel that, right? Because I was the client,
Yeah.
I was the addict, I was that street kid, I was the criminal. And I just it didn't sit well with me, but I wasn't about to stand up and being like, well, yeah, well, when I sold crack, like
Yeah.
that was not I didn't have that voice at all while I was in school. But I thought that if I could figure out how to be successful as a lawyer, I would raise my hand and be like, hey, just so you know, that was me. That person that you wanted to write off, that person that you wanted to lock up indefinitely, that person that you thought was just like this, piece of shit born
Who has no
criminal
potential. Yeah.
who has no potential to do anything, really does. But I needed to prove first that that
Yeah.
potential is more than potential, it's an actuality, right? In my mind, I was like, okay, everybody has potential, but can you actualize your potential? Because
Yeah.
that's a whole different conversation
Yeah.
and that's a whole different skill set. So I wanted to prove that I could actualize that potentiality and say, listen, like, I can win cases. I can represent people. I can do so with honesty and integrity and really further the truth-seeking functions of this system as an ex all of these things. And so I waited. I promised myself in law school that if I could figure out how to be successful, I would be open about my past. And I also wanted to be an example to others that it can be done because I didn't have examples. I was
Yeah.
in law school was 2000 yeah 2005 till 2007 2004 till 2007. And so like the mid 2000s we weren't talking mental health, we weren't talking about
Yeah,
addiction.
it's true.
Was
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the conversations were just very,
Yeah.
very different.
Yeah.
And so nobody was an example for me that you could have been a drug addict and still be a successful lawyer, or a success of anything, quite frankly. And so it was difficult. I was operating on blind faith. I just sort of believed that I could, and if I couldn't, then that's fine. I could pivot. I could always go back to crime. And so I wanted to be that example. And the shift happened for me in I think 2016. So I started practicing in civil litigation. I started in criminal law in 2010. I spent 5 years with a firm. That entire time, nobody knew my history. Nobody knew what I had been about. I was very, very quiet. I stuck to myself. I didn't do pub nights. I didn't go out drinking with other lawyers. And quite frankly, I was worried that if I had a couple drinks, I may
Yeah.
open up about who I was and what I was
Hmm.
about. And I was worried about being shunned. So I didn't do it. I had one colleague that I was friends with as in civil litigation. I had opened up to her. She was great. She was like really, really encouraging, really sweet. And I really only talked to her in like broad strokes. Like there was no, I didn't get into like the nitty gritty of what my use had been. Um, but I went out on my own in 2015 and I worked with a company that was doing PR, and they would interview me, I don't know, once a month, once every 2 months on a topic, and they would turn the interview into an article and they would publish the article. And it was just a way to get, whatever, like content out there and advertise who I was and what I was about. And they called me once, and there had been this push at the time by the Liberal government to expand the categories of individuals in Ontario who are eligible for disability benefits. And they wanted to extend to drug addiction. And they were asking me if I wanted to comment on that from the perspective of someone who defends people that are often involved in drug culture. And my head sort of exploded because this notion of my addiction being a disability, when at that point I had spent the last 6 years using my experiences to my advantage. My perspective, the way that I could speak to clients, the fact that I understood the way a
Yeah.
lot of crimes were committed, the fact that I
Hmm.
didn't judge my clients, the fact that I could look at them in the eye and have a meaningful conversation and try to understand who they were beyond the crimes they were committed. All of that for me was how I was taking, my life's disadvantages and using them for my own personal
Yeah.
gain in a way that also managed to help further my clients, both in court and hopefully, in life from what I'm told from them. And so, yeah, I was just like, oh no, no, I can't stand for this. And it just triggered me in a way that I said during the interview, like, I'm an ex-junkie. This was me, and I don't suffer from a disability. I don't want to see this as a disability. This is not, disabilities are things that you can't wake up in the morning and decide to change. A disability is someone who is paralyzed. They
Yeah.
can't get up in the morning and decide, okay, never mind, today I'm going to walk. If you have a drug addiction, you wake up and you say, you know what? I am going to spend today sober. You might need help. You may have to go to detox. You may have to go to rehab. You may need intervention from other people. And I'm not saying it's easy, it's not, but you know, it can be done like that. It's just a matter of thinking this is what I want to do. And so I did this interview. I referred to myself as a junkie. She's like, "Are you sure you want to say this?" I want to say
Hmm.
quotes put in the article. I want it. It needs to be from the perspective of someone who's actually been there and done that and come out the other side in a really meaningful way. And that was it. The article went out. I thought I was going to be disbarred. I thought I was going to lose all my
W-
clients. I
Well,
wasn't. Nobody cared. It didn't. There was,
well, that's what I wanted to ask you.
zero waves rippled. It
Oh,
was
but
like
that's good in a way
nothing.
because that's what I wanted to ask you because obviously, as you mentioned, this was happening at a completely different time. Like right now, today,
Yeah.
we have a completely different perception. People are more open now about their past, if they have trauma in their life or if they've had, like an addiction or any kind of problem that happened or issue. People are more open and more receptive. And actually, people like to hear these stories now. It wasn't the case back then.
Yeah.
And so when that story came out, so it didn't have any repercussions. Like you were still a lawyer. You didn't lose your license over that. But did you feel like there was a difference in the perception by your colleagues that at least were they curious to ask you more questions about the past? Like
I
when,
don't think anybody even commented. I don't
okay,
even know who
well, maybe
noticed.
that's
I
good.
don't know
Yeah.
who read it. I think the changes all happened internally, right?
Okay.
Like in my mind, I thought someone's going to read this, send it to someone else, going to spread like wildfire. That's it. And I was in the middle of a murder trial that I was doing in Hamilton when this came out. And I was like, I was friends with one of the co-counsel and I said to her, like, I'm done at this point. I'm just waiting for that like email from the Law Society that gives all of us a fucking heart attack when we get it,
Yeah.
the subject line. And I was just like, I'm waiting for that to come, being like, yeah, sorry, this is, you're not, this is character I'm becoming. And I was, never happened. Nothing came of it. Nothing.
Yeah.
But it shifted something in me. And it said
Yeah.
to me, oh, you know what? The world didn't come crashing down. I didn't lose a client, didn't lose a case, didn't have any negative repercussions. Maybe I'm at that place that I waited for, right? Where
And
I'm
maybe you
in
were your
control.
harshest critic, right? Like maybe
100%.
you were the one who was more judgmental about yourself more than anyone else. Because as you said, like we worry so much about things, but sometimes people don't care. They have their own problems that they have
Yes.
to deal with. They're not
Yes.
thinking about, someone else's drug addiction
Totally.
or
We don't care.
problem. I know it just shows how weird the human brain is, right? Like we just make things much bigger than what they really are.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, this was a major thing, though. Like, I mean, it's not easy to overcome a drug addiction. Like, this is not something that was easy. I mean, I just think that it's really amazing that you were able to overcome that and to, have your law degree and become a very successful lawyer. But I do want to go back to something that you did mention, Jordana, because I find it's really important, this point that you mentioned about crime prevention, that it made you realize that crime prevention is really very important. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is right now, I just feel like in criminal law, we have this culture where we're seeing a tendency towards more tougher on crimes and harsher punishments and sentences. And for someone who has experienced the criminal justice system, not just as a lawyer, but as someone who was, like involved in the system. Like, how effective is punishment versus actually preventing crimes? Like, shouldn't there be more efforts in trying to maybe help people not commit crimes as opposed to just punishing them after the fact? Like, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yes. I mean, I give this example lately quite a bit. Like, it costs on average $100,000 per inmate in the federal penitentiary system.
Mhm.
On average, it's
Per inmate,
whatever
one
per inmate,
inmate.
per
Yeah.
inmate per year. Per
Hmm.
inmate per year is roughly $100,000, depending on which jail and where you're
Yeah.
looking. Like across Canada, roughly $100,000 per inmate per year to house them, feed them, have the guards for them, transport them, like all
Wow.
expenses told. If we took that same $100,000 per person per year and put it into programs to benefit kids before the age of
Hmm.
12, right? Which is the age at which they can start being arrested. So, we hear in the news all the time this hug a thug mentality. Forget that. Put this into programming, access, breaking the bonds of intergenerational trauma, addiction, all of the programs that every community group in this country has been talking about needing funding for at this point decades, um, put it into those programs for kids before the age of 12 and also teach people before the age of 12 what the sentences or what the penalties are for breaking the law
Hmm.
and what the cycle of recidivism actually looks like and how it affects people. Because there is a huge misconception between what kids who enter the system believe is going to happen to
Yeah.
them and what actually happens to them later on. Like the amount of people that I speak to and have in my office that are charged with gun related crimes are absolutely devastated to learn you can go to jail for having an illegal firearm. Like there is
And
such a huge divide and yet, in sentences, it's all like, oh, general deterrence. We need to deter the public. Well, you
but
can't fucking deter the public if the public doesn't know
But
this
it's
is
such a
what
good point.
happened.
I mean, but this is really such a good point here because obviously, you know, it's not an excuse not to know the law, right? Like it's you
No,
can't,
but
but in the same time, a lot of people don't actually
I don't
know.
know.
They don't. And that's a really good point. Like, where are the programs that teach people, and especially younger people,
Yeah,
about the law? Because it is true. I mean, I have, and that's not just in gun related offenses, even domestic violence, like even
yeah,
these cases, a lot of people will say, well, I didn't know that if I spat on my wife, that's an assault, for example. That's
yeah.
a very simple thing,
Agreed.
but people don't know.
I
And
know.
I agree that there should be more programs on teaching people what the law is because people don't know these things.
It just needs to be one course. Have it a
Yeah.
course for grade, sixes, sevens, so they understand not only what the law is, but what the penalties are for breaking the
Yeah.
law, so that they're making an informed
Yeah.
decision in what they decide to do. Because I've got a lot of kids who run around and they're selling guns and selling drugs, and they
Yeah.
don't they know it's illegal, obviously, but they don't really understand what the penalty is, and they don't understand how the cycle of recidivism starts. So that you get into the system as a youth, you think, oh, my youth record will never follow me.
Yeah.
They're not informed of the fact that that youth record does follow you if you continue getting convicted
Exactly.
for
As an
offenses
adult.
as an adult,
Yeah.
right? And they don't realize that, and then they get to 22, 23, 24, and they have a six-page criminal record and don't understand why they can't get a job.
And on the other hand, they're exposed to social media, and there's kind of sometimes these acts are presented in a more glamorous way. Like it's
Of course
cool.
they are.
It's, like it's glamorous if you have a gun and you have, like all these things. So it is true. Like that's a very important point that there isn't enough education in the public and not just for younger people. I agree. Younger people are the most vulnerable ones, but even adults, like I'm surprised by how many adults don't even know the law very well. So it's a really great point here that you're making that I think that's like you say, maybe more money should get into those types of programs as opposed to building more jails, right? And more punishment. And
That's it. I mean, I think there needs to be alternatives because the systems that we've been running aren't working. And we all know that no matter what side of the coin that you stand on,
yeah.
we know it's not working. And so I think we need to spend more time trying to prevent young people from entering the criminal justice system.
I
And then we
agree.
also have to have much better programs of reintegration and rehabilitation. Like, I don't know why drug treatment court is an out treatment program. There should be more, institutional, inpatient settings for rehab that are alternatives to jail. There's so many creative ways that we can help people because think
Mm.
about how many people are in the criminal justice system because they're feeding an addiction.
Yeah.
If you help treat the addiction, then you would obviously prevent those crimes, like all of
Yeah.
these petty thefts and break and enters and you know crimes of random violence committed by people who are in an intoxicated state. We're missing out on an opportunity to help turn people into more productive members of society, and there's a cost argument, right? Oh, these things are expensive and they take time, but look at the cost to society, number one, in having people commit crimes, and number two, the cost of incarcerating people. Like
Yeah.
it's the same cost. Maybe it's a little bit more to have a rehab versus a jail, but someone coming out of jail isn't necessarily going to work and therefore they're not contributing to the tax system. Whereas if someone was, in rehab and that rehab also had an employment perspective on the other side of it where they're actually giving back and earning money and contributing to society, eventually it would pay for itself.
I agree. No, that's definitely a really good point. And I know, Jordana, that you don't have a lot of time, and I just wanted to talk about one last point here, though. It's when it's when you're talking to your clients, though, about your experiences. How do you navigate that?
I
Because
don't
sorry.
I don't do that.
You don't, okay, you don't mention to them your past or anything like what happened?
They can read about it, they can
Yeah.
listen to my podcast, they can listen to my interviews, but I am not here to counsel people. And I tell people from the start, like I'm trying to lead by example, but I'm not here to tell my clients to make better choices in life. That's not my role. My job is just to defend them on the charges, so I don't sit there and have conversations about my past with them. We sit, we talk about their case. If they want help, getting into rehab, or they want to speak to me about their struggles, I can be of assistance, I will. But I have been very, very clear with my clients throughout my practice. I am not here to try to make them make better choices for themselves, and it's not my role to be a counselor or a therapist to anybody.
But in terms of if, let's say, you have a client who, let's say, saw or read or heard about your story. How do you deal with that? And the reason why I'm asking that is because there are a lot of lawyers who are dealing with struggles and challenges, and there are different types of challenges. We're all human, we all have issues. And sometimes lawyers, like you, it doesn't like you seem to have the strength, like it doesn't affect you. Like you're at a point now where it doesn't. But for some lawyers, there's sometimes, still they feel like they're embarrassed if this comes up. How would you, for example, if someone is asking you for your advice, like if someone has something and they're a little bit ashamed or afraid, they don't feel comfortable talking about it, and it does come up in the context of a client discussion, how would you deal with that? What is your approach?
I have very, very strong boundaries, so I don't sit there and tell my clients about my experiences or what I've done.
Hmm.
My clients, I do, at any given time have a handful of clients that are struggling with addiction issues. I often have parents that reach out to me and say,
Yeah,
like, my child is struggling. I know you struggled. I know that you'll understand.
yeah,
Can you please help? And gladly, I'm happy to help, but I don't get on the phone with the the client, the accused, and say, yeah, well, when I used to smoke crack, like, no, I don't tell stories. I don't have those conversations. They know my history, which makes it, I think, easier for them to open up to me about their
yeah,
struggles. And I understand in ways that I think people who haven't been there wouldn't. So I don't ask a lot of questions that I don't need to, like, I
yeah.
already know the answer to. So I try to help them. I try to steer them in the direction. I'm very familiar with, a lot of the same detox programs that were available for me are still available. A lot of the same rehabs that were available are still available. My old counselor that, saved my life, he's still an
Oh,
addiction
that's nice. Yeah,
counselor. So, I try to like recommend him. So if a parent, for example, calls me and says, listen, my kid's ready to clean up, I don't know where to start this process. I know you've been through it. Can you help me? I say, yeah, absolutely. Call Jay Pasternak at Jax. He saved my life. He'll be great for you. And that's the extent of it. Like, I don't sit there and tell stories. I don't want to compare war stories. I don't want, to start talking about like where I used to use, who I used to buy from. Like, all of that is like way beyond the scope of what the solicitor client relationship is. And at the end of
hmm,
the day, like, that's the relationship I have with my clients. It's solicitor client. I'm not trying to be friends. I'm not trying to be a guidance counselor. I'm not trying to be a therapist. Like, that's not the role that I've been hired to take on. I don't want to become that, and my clients don't want that for me, right?
yeah.
Like, they want me defending them on their case, period, full stop. And that's what I want. I just want to tackle the case that I have in front of them. So, if I can guide them along the way, if there's other issues, great. But I don't I don't try to insert myself into a different role in anyone's life. And I think that boundaries are really, really important, especially for lawyers, especially today. Everything that's going on with social
Yeah.
media, everything is by text message, everything is by phone calls. I think that, or by text messages, we as a profession have to stay professional, and that requires boundaries.
That's also another really good point because I agree. Again, that's a personal feeling that I am getting. It seems like maybe, I don't know if it's because of the Zoom era, that sometimes we feel like we're losing a little bit of the professionalism in the profession. And it's true, like boundaries are really very important. This is how you can, keep things the way they're supposed to be. You're the lawyer, you're not the therapist, you're not the psychologist, you're not the social worker. And it's not even your job to find them a job or help them find a job. Like that's not really part of, I mean, you can recommend, you can tell them maybe it's good for you to get a job, but it doesn't mean that you have to be the one looking for a job for them and
Oh
getting
God,
them.
no, 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 no. And I have a wealth of resources. I have a great network. So I'll have clients to tell me, listen, like I'm done with the life. I don't know what to do. No one's gonna hire me. And I'll
Yeah,
say, okay, no problem. Call Richard Miller at Keep Six. He'll help you find a job in construction. He's amazing. He runs a
yeah,
company that's unionized. They'll teach you everything and you're good to go. So I can recommend
yeah.
people to help, and I have a great network that can do that. But like for me personally, to start taking on a role that number one, I'm not equipped to do, and number
Hmm.
two, I don't have the capacity to do, and number three, I don't have the time,
Yeah,
and it's not what we're about, right?
yeah,
You said it yourself. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a skills coach. I'm not here to find someone a job or get someone into rehab. I'm happy to make recommendations, and then that's on them.
yeah, yeah. That's really good advice. So, Jordana, I don't want to take much of your time, but it's always very nice to hear from you. And it's very nice to see that you're always, working hard and that you're a very successful criminal defense lawyer. We're very proud to have you on the defense side of the bar. And that, like you're continuing to be amazing. So thank you so much for your time
Thank
today.
you. Thank you so much, Maya. You're so sweet. I always love chatting with you. You've
Oh, same,
always
same.
got great questions lined up.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. So thank you.
Thank you.